Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about the top mistakes that summer associates make so that you can avoid making them. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Allison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Want to be sure your summer is a success? Visit careerdicta.com and sign up for career coaching with our experienced team. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about the top mistakes summer associates make so you can avoid making them or fix them if you happen to make them. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
Our pleasure. So I'm sure that you have seen a lot of summer associate mistakes in your time coordinating summer programs because you did this for a while. So what's the very worst thing that you've seen?
I've seen a lot of smaller mistakes. I haven't seen a ton of really huge mistakes. We did have a summer associate that got very inebriated at a work function and threw up on a partner's wife.
That's not good.
And I believe he was head of a practice group.
Wow. Yeah, that's typically not going to be a conversation you want to have the next morning. So do you remember what happened last night?
Just horribly embarrassing, I'm sure, for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I summered with the girl who jumped in the Hudson River, so it happens.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
there's
famous
always
aqua
those
girl.
Famous stories, but I would say, there's a lot of smaller ones. The other really big mistake that I saw was a summer associate who somewhere about halfway through told us that his understanding was that you got credit for doing the most assignments and that we were keeping track of how many assignments everyone was doing. And he actually had 13 assignments going at the same time, but had made very little progress on any of them and was like completely underwater and, was behind on deadlines. And when we finally sort of pieced this together, because we kept hearing from people on the assignments that he wasn't finished, that was his answer.
Wow, like how would he have gotten that impression?
I couldn't understand it because I knew from the beginning that we would always say, it's really like quality over quantity, which I think is true. I don't know. I think he just got into this mess, and honestly, he never really got himself out of it.
Well, how could you? I mean, I think, the average summer probably does a handful of assignments, not 13.
And it was only halfway through. So I kept
thinking
like, oh, he was going to take on more.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've summered a lot of places. I don't know that anyone ever had that impression. But hey, that's why it's a mistake, right? So if you're listening, FYI, probably not in your best interest to take on as many assignments as you possibly think you could, because it's probably more than you actually can.
And trust me, there are no firms that do that.
No, I mean, no one would ever do that.
Yeah. So those
that just
are my
seems crazy.
Two sort of worst on like the social side, the work side.
What are some common, but maybe not quite as terrible things that you see a lot?
Well, I think similar to the second person I was saying, I do see a lot of people that either take on too much, can't finish things, kind of get into trouble, with an assignment or kind of their workload generally. I think it's hard for summer associates when they're starting to know how much to take on and how long things should be taking. So I think that's a common mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think other common mistakes are just kind of not remembering that you're always at work when you're a summer associate. So the social side, maybe not as extreme as that example, but kind of maybe drinking a little too much or saying something you shouldn't have said or saying something to the wrong person or not remembering, that you're not all just friends and that it's really work.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I also work someplace where summer I think not only didn't get an offer, but managed to get himself fired by like hitting on too many people. And, it's just one of those things you're like, really? Come on.
And it's a lot to get fired as a summer associate.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was one of those things where like multiple people had gone independently and complained about similar behavior. And the firm was just like, we can't have this person here, like, I mean, this just isn't going to work out.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be that person who they're thinking could be a liability later on. That's not going to get you an offer.
Mm-hmm. And especially also in those kind of situations, maybe it's happened like once and they talk to you about it, and then you don't take that to heart and change your behavior.
Yeah, that's probably not going to go over very well either.
Yeah. Usually this kind of starts slow, and usually someone will talk to you about it.
Right. All right, well, we're going to talk about some common problems in a minute and scenarios, but before we get there, what kind of mindset do you think new summer associates should go into the summer with to try to avoid some of these problems? I mean, you mentioned earlier thinking you're always at work. Tell me more about that.
So that's really my top piece of advice for a summer associate. And it doesn't mean that you can't be yourself and you can't have real conversations with people, or even that you can't talk to them about things outside of work. I think that's fine. But it's an 8, 9, 10, 12-week job interview. And that means when you're in the office, when you're at social events with people from work, if you're at like an outside meeting, whatever it is, these people are watching you to see how you're doing to decide whether they're going to give you a job offer. And, it's an unusual process compared to like lots of other industries, but it really is a chance for everyone to get to know each other. So you want to like put your best foot forward all the time.
I think that's right. I mean, I think, you want to be a professional. Like you might think of yourself as a student. Maybe this is actually your first real like grown up full-time job, but you're basically auditioning to be a real lawyer, and so you need to be that professional self. And that comes down to, what you wear to the office, how you behave at events, how you treat your work product, all of these things. They're looking for you to be a grown-up.
Right. And I think that means, in these social situations, I think it can be kind of hard. And I think some people almost feel like it's a trap. Like, they're serving alcohol, they're encouraging us to like get relaxed and all that stuff. But, I think most people can find a balance between, doing that and having a good time and trying to get to know people, and also remembering that, you need to be professional and you have to, kind of cap it somewhere. I know a lot of people would say like, I don't have more than 2 drinks.
Exactly. I mean, you're not at a frat party. Mm-hmm. You're not hanging out with your friends at a bar. I think, having some sort of guidelines for yourself, particularly if you know that maybe this has been an issue for you or could be an issue for you. I mean, either you say, I'm just going to have 1 drink, or I'm going to alternate drinks with water and stop at 2, or maybe I'm not going to drink at all. And, I think sometimes that makes people a little bit uncomfortable. The idea that like, well, some people are going to know if I'm not drinking. That's not really true. Like you can basically ask any bartender to make you something like, soda water with a lime in it. No one else knows what that is. Exactly.
I actually think let's say you don't drink normally, or you've decided not to drink for this, I also think like, don't make it a big deal. I think that's totally. I know a lot of people who would come in and, and not be drinkers, and they would kind of tell everyone over and over again. And I think that's what makes it uncomfortable. It's like, don't make it into a thing, and nobody else is going to make it into a thing.
And if somebody does try to make it into a thing, like that person is being a jerk. It's not about you.
Exactly.
If you're, people have all sorts of reasons to decline alcohol. And if, there are plenty of things, I'm sorry, I'm taking antibiotics. If my doctor says I can't drink, like no big deal. Or just, hey, I don't drink.
Yeah.
Leave it alone,
And I think most people wouldn't, push you on any of this. There's lots of legal reasons not to.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something people really want to push on you if you say that you don't want it, for all kinds of reasons. But, I think that if you do think that's an issue for you or could be an issue for you, I think, it might even be better off just saying from the start of the summer, hey, I don't drink, like I'll have a soda.
Exactly. And I think, the other thing to keep in mind when you're at these social events is that anyone you bring is also a reflection of you.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because I was going to say another example was somebody who brought a guest to a social event who drank too much and started just blabbing about the person to everybody and told me that this person didn't really want to work at the firm.
Oh, wow.
They were just there. They wanted to do public interest. They were just there to like make some money.
Yeah, probably not going to end well.
Yeah, it didn't. But I would say that you're responsible for the person that you bring and their behavior. So think carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you might need to brief that person too. I mean, not on, don't tell them I don't want to work here. That should be pretty obvious. But, like, hey, this is a professional setting. Like, I'm not going to be really drinking a lot. Like, it's probably going to could be a little boring, but let's like not try to offend anyone.
Yeah. And I think bring somebody who you think, makes sense in that environment and that sort of thing. And can be social and be like a positive reflection.
You want to be like, oh, wow, that person you brought was so nice. I really enjoyed talking to them.
And I've had lots of those experiences too, where people are like, oh, I love, this person's significant other. So
yeah, they seem great.
So I think that's what I mean by like, you're always at work, is that even when you're in the social situations, people are trying to see who you are, how you behave, your professionalism, that sort of thing.
On that note, do you think it's a problem if people are invited to bring a guest and they don't feel like they have anyone they can bring? I mean, maybe they're summering in a different city. They don't really have friends there or significant others.
No, I really don't. And I think that you might get yourself in trouble by really like struggling to find somebody to bring that you don't know that well.
Right.
Or it could be awkward, like, between you and that person, or
like, oh, how do you guys know each other? Oh, we just met on Tinder last week.
And I actually had someone do that also.
I mean, fine, maybe not the best judgment. Again, there you might want to brief the person. Hey, let's not mention, here's our story for how we met.
Yeah. It's just, keep it short. But I would say I've always had summer classes where, some people never brought guests, some people always brought somebody. And I don't think it really matters so much.
I don't think it matters at all. I mean, I feel like
it just matters that you're bringing someone that's going to be okay in that situation.
Yeah, I think if you have any doubts, just go alone. You're not going to be the only person who's without a guest. And, it's a pretty easy answer. Like, oh, yeah, I'm new in town. I don't really know too many people.
The other thing I'd say is that, you don't want to bring someone where you have to like worry about them or you feel like they're not going to be comfortable talking to people. You should be focused on, that you need to talk to people and what you're doing. And so I wouldn't do something that's going to take your focus off of that.
Yeah, probably not a great second date.
Yeah. Wait till the end of the summer.
Yeah, if it's still going well, 2 months later, you can bring them to the finale party.
Exactly.
That's usually at like a nice partner's house or something, so they'll be really impressed.
I would also say that, these events kind of get like looser and people get more comfortable as they go. So, keep that in mind.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk now about some common scenarios and how people can avoid them or recover from them if, unfortunately, they happen to find themselves in this scenario. So you talked a little bit about this earlier, but what if you make some type of error in your work product?
I would say that don't ever try to hide it. So if you know you made an error, you need to go to the, person you are working with. Or if you're not sure about them, I think you could start with your mentor, or an associate you're comfortable with and explain what happened. And then you could get some advice first. But I would make sure that you bring it to someone's attention as soon as possible, because something like that, if they knew that you knew it was a mistake or this mistake could affect, the work or somebody else, you don't want that, happening.
Yeah, I think you just kind of got to own it. What if they come to you and you have no idea that you've made this mistake and somebody comes to you and says, you know what, actually this case is not good law. We just filed this brief.
So I would not panic.
Which is probably going to be your first response.
Yeah, and I understand why people would. And maybe, it's hard to take this advice. But I think panicking could get you into a worse situation where you're continuing to say the wrong thing or I think everyone knows that freaking out about something like this isn't going to help. So I would say, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, can you tell me more? Or can I look into this more? Try to see if there's anything that you can do to like alleviate the situation. I also think like you need to learn what the mistake was.
Right.
for your
how it happened.
Yeah, exactly. Because everyone makes mistakes.
Everyone makes mistakes. I remember once I prepared some document as a summer associate, and I was really proud of it, and I thought I'd done a really great job on this analysis, and then I get a call the next morning from the associate I gave it to, who's like, do you realize you misspelled our client's name?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, obviously it hadn't gone anywhere by that point,
Yeah.
but he's like, you need to come talk to me about this. And, you know, he was basically just like, I don't care how amazing the rest of this is. You cannot do something like this. Like, you have to double check, triple check people's names. Like, of course, everyone's going to see that their own name is misspelled, and you cannot send that out like this. So that was a good lesson. Hopefully I've never misspelled anyone's major's name again, but you know, it happens. And I owned it.
Other thing is it the first time it happened, or is it like the fifth time it happened? You know, because I think everyone gets that, like, you know, some dumb mistake that they made, but it's like, did you learn from it and really check things and not let something like that happen again?
Right. And what he said to me at the time, too, that I remember is like, look, I've never worked with you before, so now I wonder if I can trust you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what else did you screw up here? And then he finally read the rest of it and was like, actually, it's really good. But, like, you know, he still had that doubt about, well, I'm not sure I can really trust this person.
Yeah, and that goes along with the advice that another thing to remember is every time you give someone something, it shouldn't be just a draft.
Right. There's no such thing as like a rough draft in the law firm world.
And it really bothers people if you say that that's what it is.
Well, I mean, I think there are things that can be not finalized. Obviously, there may be questions where you've gotten to a fork in the legal path and you're like, oh, you know, I don't know if we want to go this way or that way. But you just phrase that in your whatever you're writing as the actual question. Like, hey, I need some input on this. Not, oh, I don't know what to do here. And the same thing, you know, like citations, maybe they don't have to be totally perfect on that first draft, but you have to make it clear that, you know, you're using some sort of format and you're going to put them in later or whatever. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the case. You need to fully cite check something as a draft. But again, you might also want to ask about that.
Well, and I think like typos or things like that are never acceptable. Like, you can't expect, oh, well, I thought you were going to like proofread the whole thing.
Right. Well, I think that's the key to take away here is you have to assume as a summer that you are the last person who is going to see this before it goes out.
Yeah. And I know that's a lot of pressure and it's scary.
It is. It's scary, but it's also a mindset that, you know, I think will serve people well in a legal career, is not assuming somebody else is going to do the work after them.
Well, and I would also keep in mind, I think summers don't think about, especially if they're working on client work, that, you know, the clients are paying for that work at a fairly high rate. And I think, yeah. And so I think they have to go in with some confidence, I think is good too. You know, like, I worked on this. I feel confident that it's, you know, it's good, and, you know, that you're a professional. You know, not overly, but I think you should feel like you're, you know, like they trusted you with something they thought you could do.
Right. I think having pride in your work product is a good approach to things. You know, is this something you'd be proud of if it went out like this? And if not, then keep working on it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that actually leads into another common problem. So what if you start down a path in an assignment and realize you either don't understand it, or it's taking way too long, or in some cases, maybe you're being too much of a perfectionist and you just can't let it go?
This is another situation where I think like a mentor is helpful. You know, and hopefully people do have, you know, those associate or partner mentors. You know, or it could be somebody, you know, that you're working on the assignment with. But I would say that if you feel like that's happening, I would deal with it sooner rather than later. So the other thing I've seen people do is, I think that they kind of knew that was happening and they just kept going. And they would tell us, they're like, oh, it snowballed, you know, and you could see this like look of horror on their face.
Right, because it's supposed to be like a 2-day assignment, and suddenly it's 2 weeks and they still haven't finished it, and they burned like tons of research money, and it's just like, where is this piece of information that someone needs? Like, why haven't you finished this?
Able to fill you out, you know, for that, and it kind of just, it's not a good look. So I would say you probably knew way before it got to that point that it maybe was, you know, this kind of thing, and I think that's the time to bring it up with somebody. And to talk about it before you see it getting out of control. Because sometimes they give you an assignment and kind of maybe they gave you a rough timeline of how long they thought it was going to take. I know on our assignment systems, there would always be like an hour estimate. And maybe they were wrong. Like maybe it was going to take a lot longer, and that's okay. And you could talk to them about it. So it's not, sometimes, it is just a bigger assignment than the person realized, but sometimes you might need somebody to help you scale it back and focus. And I do think like summer associates are supposed to be learning, and most of the attorneys know that.
Right. And I think a lot of this goes back to a podcast we did earlier about how to set yourself up for success on an assignment. And a lot of this starts with really getting that information you need in that first meeting. And one piece of that information is probably, well, do you have a sense of how long this ought to take? And if you're getting way beyond that, I think you're absolutely right. Like you've got to talk to someone who can give you advice about, okay, well, I don't think you need to be doing this, or this line of research doesn't seem productive, or yeah, you're right, this actually is more complicated. And then they can help you figure out how to go back to the person who gave you the work and say, look, here's the situation. What do you want me to do about it?
And I think the issue here for some people is that some people have the natural inclination that if they've made a mistake or they feel like something's wrong, they try to bury it. Hide it, and I think there are definitely people who do that, and we all do it sometimes. But in this situation, don't do that.
No, you've got to get out ahead of something like this, and basically make it someone else's problem to be like, hey, here's a situation. Like, how do you want me to handle it?
Exactly,
because you're not supposed to know how to handle every situation. Like, you've just started working there,
and I promise you, they're going to appreciate that more. Even if you've wasted a little bit of time or it's wrong or whatever, they're going to appreciate that more than the 2 weeks later situation.
Yeah, that's just a disaster for everyone because someone's been waiting for this and then you still don't have it. It's just not going to go well.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit out of the work context. So what if you perhaps unintentionally upset someone who's employed by the firm? So whether it's a partner, an associate, a paralegal, a secretary, another summer, they're mad at you.
Yeah, that's hard. It definitely happens. I would say, so I think there's different scenarios with this, right? There's a situation where you realize right away that you upset them, like the words come out of your mouth and they weren't right.
Right. I mean, maybe you're saying something racist, sexist, homophobic, take your pick, and you immediately realize, oh my gosh, and that was totally inappropriate.
That if you were with your friends, they would understand you didn't mean it that way. That happens. I don't think you're a terrible person, but I think in those situations,
I mean, they might be. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest.
It's true.
Maybe you are.
You might be, and then you probably don't even realize.
Right. I mean, that's true. Then you probably wouldn't even realize that this is wildly inappropriate.
And we've all met people like that. I would say if you see it in the moment, I would say it in the moment. I would say, "Oh, I'm sorry," or "Did I offend you?" or "I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that way. I really."
Like, oh my gosh, I realized that must have sounded really terrible.
Yeah. I think people really appreciate someone, like saying that out loud right away. Some people might still be offended, but I don't know if there's much more you can do in that moment other than say that and mean it, Yeah. And I think most people appreciate that everyone makes mistakes. I also think there's a situation where you had no idea what happened, and either someone comes to talk to you later, or or it becomes obvious to you that someone's like ignoring you, or everyone knows like signs when someone's upset. So I would say if someone approaches you about it, I would ask, what did I say? Try to understand it. Again, I would apologize, because even if you didn't mean it that way, you should apologize that the person felt bad or felt offended or or was upset. I think kind of like the other things we were saying, it's just best to bring it out in the open and kind of own it. Mm-hmm. Some things are harder than others.
Yeah, it really depends on how bad this is.
Right. I'm assuming it's not, I can't even think of something that would be, So I haven't experienced anything that I thought was
right. I mean, sometimes I think there is a particular type of law student as well who maybe thinks that, we're just having a friendly argument about this topic, and other people really don't take it that way. They take it much more personally. So again, I think this is an area where you just want to be careful and think carefully about, do I want to wade into this area?
Yeah, it's sort of, it's what people say about dinner parties or things like that, like probably leave like politics and religion and certain topics just like out of this situation.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of other things you can talk about. If you're at a party, at a firm event, and you don't know what to talk to people about, just say, oh, what are you working on these days? What type of work do you do? Keep it work focused, and you're probably on pretty safe ground. If you start talking about, the latest political news or something, I think people could pretty quickly go into areas that might be a little dodgy.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's hard, especially in, today's environment. Everyone's talking about a lot of this stuff. But I think to the best, that you can, I would try to just stay away from it. And if it happens, I would apologize.
Right, exactly. Perhaps repeatedly to multiple people.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about being a summer associate, though, is if somebody does say something or is offended and then tells somebody else, you probably are going to hear about it, like from the head of the summer committee or your partner mentor. Like somebody is going to probably come talk to you about it, at least in any summer programs I've worked at. So if someone does that, I would try to be genuine with them and, try to understand what happened and not get really defensive.
Right. And what if you're on the flip side of this? What if you're a summer associate who's at an event and someone, say a partner, an associate says something really offensive to you?
So I guess you have to sort of decide how bad it is and what you want to do with it. I think if they say something that's like sexual harassment, that you should tell somebody. I think people would want to know at the firm. So you can tell, any of the people I'm saying. So you could tell your mentor, you could tell the recruiter, you could tell the head of the summer committee, you could talk to HR. And I have had summers do that before. And, they really do investigate and, it does like open something.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about time management type of problems, because I know those are things that we see a lot. So, for example, someone blows a work deadline and they just don't get something done, or you're showing up late to meetings, maybe to the office, to events repeatedly. You accept a calendar invite or you RSVP to something and then you don't show up. I mean, how can people handle these? I mean, maybe they're overworked, maybe they have personal stuff going on. Like, what's going on here?
So I would say, actually, these are kind of big deals to law firms. And I think some of this stuff, summer associates don't necessarily realize are a big deal. But I would say, first of all, you should be keeping your calendar. You should make sure that it has like alerts that warn you, in increments, so you know something's coming up. If you have a deadline, I would give yourself a deadline that's earlier than the deadline. Because the other thing is, even if it's not late, and somebody says something's due on a certain day, turning it in at like 11 p.m. isn't a great idea either.
No, it just looks bad.
Do that, yeah. So it's not really late, but it's not really on time.
Well, and also the person's wondering, like, where is this? And that's not a sensation you want the person who gave you work to have.
So the other thing is, I kind of think there's no excuse for it being late and you not having talked to the person somewhere before it was late to tell them. And I think most people are kind of okay with extending a deadline if it's possible, and if you explain yourself. So I think that's okay, but you really have to have brought it up and have reason, and I think that's really important with work assignments, and with events or meetings or things like that. So something that you might want to even clarify at the beginning, I know that I've had issues with this with summers, where at some places, if someone sends you a calendar invite, like for a meeting and you accept it, they like take that as an RSVP, like you're going. Other people think, oh, I'm just putting it on my calendar because I might go. So I would kind of clarify like what's expected of you in terms of that kind of thing. We had an issue one summer where actually the whole summer class didn't show up for this training. It was like a, explaining what the corporate group was. And it was like going to be at like 8 a.m. And we had a small summer class and it was firm wide. So, it was like going to be on video, but everyone was going to be in different offices and no one showed up in our office. And like partners had prepared a presentation and were there early. we'd ordered food and and the partner who was doing it was also someone on the hiring committee.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
The hiring partner. And she was very, very upset.
Understandably.
Yeah. And then when we asked them what happened, someone basically told me they had an exercise class and invited other people. And yeah. And they didn't think this was required. They thought it was come if you want to.
Yeah, that's probably not a great assumption to make. I mean, I feel again, you need to be a grown-up here. Okay, fine, you don't really want to be in the office at 8 a.m., but question, what is it that's happening at 8 a.m. that they're asking me to be here for? Is that a person that I might want to have on my side? Is that a person I'd like to offend? Yeah. And get out of bed early.
Yeah, I mean, it was totally crazy. And so I actually decided to have a meeting with all the summers to talk to them, generally about coming to things, and RSVPing. Because I also said, if things are optional, it's fine if you don't go and you tell them you're not going, but you can't say you're going and not show up.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good overall thing to take away from this. If you say you're going to something, you need to be there, and you need to be there basically on time, smiling, ready to go, happy, that's your job. And
the other thing I say is even the stuff that's quote unquote optional, they're paying you for a pretty good gig to be a summer associate. You should really be trying to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. Let's talk about that a little bit. So what if somebody, for whatever reason, really can't make it or just doesn't want to go to a bunch of these social events? Is that going to be a real problem for them?
I think if it's a bunch, it is a problem. I would say, I think most firms do about one social event a week. And so I think it's fine to miss one or even two, especially if you have a specific reason. But I would say that you really shouldn't be missing more than that unless you have a reason. And if you do, you need to tell them what the reason is or explain it in some form, because they're putting on these events to get to know you, and they're not just for fun. They actually are part of the whole process. There's a reason that they do it. It's kind of the same way that when you're doing an interview to be a summer associate, you go to lunch.
Right.
So even it's a lunch interview, but it's a way to kind of get to know people in a more casual setting. So I do really think it's important. And I think that you missing a lot of events is not putting your best foot forward.
Right, because you want to make sure that people have an understanding of, this seems like a good, decent person. I kind of like them from what I know. You don't want to be a black box. And I think sometimes, too, if they're doing volunteer events and things like that, you don't want to miss those events because you think you don't need to go to them. I mean, that's an opportunity for you to, take one for the team, be a community-minded person. These are things that firms are interested in. So definitely don't skip those because you don't think that they sound very fun.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times those kind of things also are on a weekend. We would usually do one weekend thing. I don't think most firms are doing, a lot. But even if it is a weekend, I don't think it's asking that much to go to one, we did a, Habitat for Humanity kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember once, my firm had a weekend event out in the Hamptons or something, and I'd literally just come back from 6 weeks in London and had the worst cold ever. And there I was just you know what? I just can't do it. I'm jet lagged. I'm sick. I have to go to work on Monday. I cannot possibly go there for the weekend. But people still they gave me a hassle about it. Oh, we really missed you. You weren't there.
I wouldn't give someone a hassle about that, especially if they explained it. But I imagine that some people do. I also think sometimes it matters about how big the summer class is.
This was huge. There were 100 people. Yeah. I'm who even knows if I'm there? But they did.
But I think, if you're in a summer class of 5 people, they're going to know if you're not there.
Oh, for sure. And people will notice. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about people who just behave badly. So, you mentioned earlier getting really drunk at a firm event and doing something stupid. I've heard about people, hitting on people who aren't receptive to their advances, that kind of stuff. What can people do here?
Don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do it.
I feel the advice is yeah. And my advice about hitting on people or dating other summers or dating other people at the firm is don't do it.
I agree. I just think it's
you can do it later if you really want to. I don't know if it's ever that good of an idea, but don't do it while you're a summer associate, please. And I would say in terms of, getting too drunk or embarrassing yourself, I really would just, take into account what we said about it being a job interview. You shouldn't really act very different at that, event than you do in the office. Let's say that you make a mistake. I also think, what we've talked about is like you need to own it and apologize. And if you offended anyone or did anything wrong and then
threw up on their wife.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That person did get an offer. Just want to say. But I think that was a long shot. And I think, if you do something like that, like, you can't drink at any other events. Like,
right. You definitely need to be clean living for the rest of the summer.
Yeah.
And I think in that case, you could actually make a bigger deal about, oh, no, thank you. I'm not drinking. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
Make sure everyone hears, oh, I'm not drinking. Thank you.
I do think depending on the scenario, like people do get second chances. The firm wants to give you an offer. That's another thing to keep in mind.
Right.
They don't want anything to happen. They don't want anyone to not get an offer. So don't give them reasons to not give you an offer.
I agree. So let's talk a little bit about this. So what if some firms I know do midsummer reviews. Mm-hmm. What if somebody gets a bad review, either midsummer or, at the final? The final one, obviously, they can't do a lot. But say you get a midsummer review and it's not that great.
I really think you have a chance to turn it around by the midsummer. Like you said, it's a lot harder if it's right at the end or something. But the whole idea of a midsummer review is to let everyone know where they are. And if they're having some kind of big issues, that they do have a chance to turn it around. So listen to what the issues are. And I would say, if it's not clear from the review what the problem was, I think you should ask. You should ask the person you worked with or who's ever giving you the review. And I think you need to actively figure out steps to change things.
Right. I think you've got to be a grown up and own this and say, okay, thanks a lot for this feedback. Maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. I didn't realize that was a problem with this piece of work product that I turned in. I'll definitely go and speak with whoever it is. Mm-hmm. Get their feedback, or do you have any suggestions for me immediately about things that I can do? Basically just be receptive and open to feedback. And obviously if somebody suggests that you do something, you probably ought to do it.
Well, and I think it can be hard, this whole review situation at law firms, because lawyers actually are really bad at giving direct feedback.
Right.
And, even filling out written reviews. And so I do think it's on the firm's part if you had no idea there was anything wrong, and no one had given you feedback.
Right. It's a little passive aggressive.
Yeah, exactly. And I find, that the people that seem the most straightforward sometimes are the people who are the worst.
Yeah, or they just don't tell you anything and you assume everything went fine, and then you turn out that they gave you the scathing review of your work product that you had no idea about.
On the other hand, I think sometimes summer associates aren't listening when they're actually being given feedback and they don't realize it's feedback. So I know that I would always encourage attorneys to use the word feedback as much as possible at the beginning and end of their talk, because sometimes feedback really is like, great job, and that's fine. And sometimes feedback is something negative and the summer associate didn't really pick up on what they were saying, because maybe it wasn't that direct, or maybe it wasn't in the form that they were expecting. Like it wasn't like a formal sit down meeting. So I would say, it also could be on you to solicit feedback, and to ask how things are going.
Right. And sometimes someone might give you like a redlined copy of something you worked on. I think it's great to go back to them and say, hey, I got your comments on this. I picked them up. Is there anything else that you'd want to talk about? Or how do you think I did, or whatever? To really be a little more proactive, I think is not going to hurt you one bit.
And I also think that if you're blowing deadlines, because the feedback might be that your work product's great, but they don't want to work with you anymore because it's not on time.
Yeah, which sounds harsh, but time is everything in the legal profession.
Absolutely. So I really think that the midsummer review is a chance to turn around. So even if you have one that's pretty bad, it's all is not lost.
Right. I think you can go to someone with a plan after hearing this. Maybe you think about it for a couple of days and you come back and say, okay, Yeah, I don't know who this person would be. Would this person be like the head of the summer program? Or, I mean, who would you talk to at this point if you're like, okay, here's what I want to do differently?
So I think the recruiter actually can be a good person to talk to about who you should talk to, because it's kind of different everywhere. But usually it would be the head of the summer committee or like a partner mentor.
Right. And, maybe you've gotten feedback that your research wasn't strong and you're like, oh, I'm going to take an online class offered by Westlaw or Lexis or whoever, whatever, but having something that you're kind of like, okay, I recognize this problem and here's how I'm going to address it, I think could be very effective.
Even I'll say we had somebody who got an offer at the end of the summer, but with the caveat that these were things that this person needed to work on. And I really was impressed because they came back and said, I'm taking, these courses this semester, or I'm going to, if it was like, I need to work on my writing, it's like, I plan to do this, and even though they already had the offer, it really like started everything off on a better note, that they were so receptive and really like proactive about it.
Yeah, I think people like that. They like it that, okay, you heard this and then you have a reasonable plan for dealing with it. We assume you're going to execute on that plan. And then when you come back, this is not going to be an issue, which is really what the goal is. And
I will say that most of the problems that I've seen with summer associates, it's less like the actual, they couldn't do the work, or they didn't understand it. And it's more of all the other stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Deadlines or appropriateness or things like that.
Yeah, just generally not being an idiot goes a long way. All right. Well, we're out of time. And any final thoughts on how people can avoid making mistakes this summer or recover if they do?
Well, I would say that really, like we've said about it being a job interview, that you should take it seriously. That there is a lot of fun stuff with being a summer associate. They're taking you out for lunches, you're going to events, it's probably not a ton of work. But I would say that, you should be taking the stuff you're doing seriously, whether it's in the office, outside of the office, and you really want to be making a good impression. So really the best way to handle a mistake is to really think about what you're doing going into it and not get into any of these situations. But if you do, my number one advice is to not hide anything and to own it and not be defensive.
I think that's all fantastic advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sadie. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. With that, we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com. Or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. And if you're looking for career help, check out our career subsite, Career Dicta. We even offer career coaching. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.